Welcome everyone, Costin here with my Legendary Lore tier list for Total War Warhammer 3, Omens of Destruction. I'm only counting the new Legendary Lords that Creative Assembly is adding with Omens of Destruction, not the ones that have been reworked, like Scrag, Greasus, to some extent Skarsnik, and Warzak. Starting from the worst to the very best, we have Gorbad Ironclaw. For what it is worth, Gorbad Ironclaw is not a bad Legendary Lord in isolation. If we look at his Lord effects, minus 10% upkeep, Orcs are the best, the skill line over here, character experience, research rate, all these kind of things, they're all pretty useful skills. So Gorbad is a great Legendary Lord to actually use himself. But the problem is not related to his starting position or anything like that. It's related to his unique campaign mechanics. First off, you get income from raising settlements in this campaign, which is pretty damn pointless if you're playing a greenskin campaign. As for the global recruitment benefit, it doesn't work. Hopefully it will work in the final version. There might be some mods I have enabled that is affecting that, but I've tried without mods, so it's a version issue. Hopefully it will be fixed in the final version. There are some bugs clearly present over here. That is an issue. But the biggest problem I have with Gorbad, and the reason I'm ranking him so the lowest of the bunch, I mean, he's a pretty okay Legendary Lord when you're considering the overall picture of Warhammer 3. But as part of the Omens of Destruction Legendary Lords, he's kind of the least interesting of the bunch. Because, in effect, you're kind of playing a generic Legendary Lord for greenskins with some benefits. But those benefits don't really feel tangible, and they're pretty annoying. Like, yeah, you get minus 5% upkeep for Orc Boys and Orc Boar Boys if you have Orc Boys in your army, which you may not have for a very long time. I mean, if it counted Spear Boys, that might last longer. You get Flammable if you have one Squig in your army, but only if you have a Squig in your army, and that's a tier 1 unit, or if you have 3 Squigs in your armies. This is why it's annoying with Gorbad, because you get a bunch of these buffs that may not necessarily be that useful. You do get some stuff that is useful later on, but again, you do have that annoying factor where you do need to maintain certain units in an army to get those buffs. But those buffs feel meaningless. The early game buffs are not necessarily changing your battle gameplay all that much. The longer term stuff, especially the campaign benefits like, getting replenishing campaign movement range after winning a battle, if you have Wolf Riders and Orc Boar Boys, that can be extremely useful, to be sure, but you have to go all the way to Solid to make it happen. So it does create, so it's a gimmicky campaign mechanic that I don't really feel adds all that much to a greenskin campaign. Greenskin campaigns inherently are faster paced than some other races. People can talk about how many turns they play a campaign, but the meat of a campaign in Warhammer 3, the most challenging aspect of it, the most interesting aspect is early on. Forcing me to either get buildings of a certain tier or going into a specific province to get certain benefits that are temporary and then require a bunch of micromanagement in an army in terms of the units I have to reapply them, have to use them in each individual army is not great. A much better campaign that did have the idea of like, oh, you can get unique unit buffs and all that, Malachi. Because they're global benefits, you unlock them once, you're done, you don't have to worry about them anymore. Yes, you do need to fight certain enemies and potentially certain armies in certain territories, but one of the crucial things about Malachi is like there's so many ways to unlock some of those buffs in his campaign. Like, regardless of what you're doing, you don't have to go, say, for instance, in the Empire to get the flame cannon benefits. You can get some of those benefits elsewhere and get the quest battle without ever stepping foot in the Empire. There are ways around that. So there's more ways to get access to Malachi's buffs. They're easier to get, easier to use, and they actually feel impactful. But one of the big problems in Gorbad's campaign with all these buffs is, it's like, oh, it's making a lot more playstyles viable. It's not. The reason it's not, like Malachi buffs units are already pretty strong, and already with the Dwarf rework you had different playstyles viable. Whereas with Greenskins, let me tell you what's more viable. Orcs, so Biggins, Black Orcs. You don't need to recruit Goblins anymore in a Greenskin campaign. But then you have all these buffs for Gorbad, which are like, oh, we can buff Squigs, we can buff Wolf Riders and all that. But here's the inherent issue of that compared to, say, Malachi. These units, like some of these units are obviously pretty great. Like the army can use Tunneling to engage in battle if, you know, you have some Goblins and you have some Rogue Idols. There's certainly some good stuff over here, but it takes way too long to unlock. So by that time you do it. And there's a lot of fluff as well. Whereas you compare this to Malachi, you look at the units Malachi has. Do you know what they all have in common except the Goblin Cures, and only to some extent? They're all good in both field battles and sieges. In sieges, they're easy battles, but if you have the right army. If you go with the full-on Wolf Rider army in a siege, those Wolf Riders are pointless. Those Forest Spider units are pointless. Those Squigs, far less useful. Sure, a couple of Manglore Squigs, a couple of units here and there, but if CA is trying to push variety, they gotta acknowledge the fact that we do have to deal with sieges. We do have to deal with the reality that the way we play campaigns is incentivized by minimizing casualties, so having an army that's good at taking less damage, not just winning the battle, but winning the battle in a way that you are taking the least amount of damage possible. And that is not something a lot of these buffs can do. That is something that a lot of Malachi's buffs can do. Because he's buffing ranged units, he's buffing flying units. And he's buffing them in such a way that, yes, they may do more damage, they may have bigger benefits, but he's also crucially improving the overall survivability of his army. And even giving some units replenishment, like gyrocopters with freaking replenishment, gyro bombers that drop multiple bombs and can erase entire doom stacks. That is powerful. Even if they've nerfed gyrocopters recently, it is still a very, very powerful playstyle. And there's so many, and it does create more variety in that campaign as opposed to Gorbad. Because if I'm playing a Gorbad campaign, the supposed variety is not really there. There's no reason why I shouldn't use Biggins, Stone Trolls, Night Goblins, and some artillery. That is the best army. Maybe a couple of units here and there, but I'm certainly not going to play with the variety that CA probably wants you to play around it. So it just feels like a cheap, unique mechanic. Not a bad Legendary Lord, again, not a crap one. It's not an Epidemia situation. Epidemia is total garbage. But also not necessarily a great campaign either. I mean, it can be fun from, you know, campaign starting position, but from a unique mechanic perspective, faction effects, it leaves a lot to be desired. In third position, we have Skulltaker. I'm sorry, Skulltaker is just not that interesting. To be fair, it's not even his fault necessarily with respect to some of these issues. I do think he's better than Gorbad because he at least has some ways to spice up his campaign, even if it's reliant on cultists and corn cults to just traverse Lustria. But one of the things that does genuinely hurt this campaign is Lustria sucks. It's buggy, and it's especially bad for Khorne, because a lot of these ruined settlements, like I've shown this in another video, but I'll show it again. Let's say I have an army here. I have a ruined settlement that I personally ruined. I want to get to the other side. I can't just go for a settlement. I don't have enough movement range anyway to go for it. But if I try and, you know, give a movement order, you can see the movement path. It's either going to be south or north. It's not going to be the direct shortest path because you can't move through ruined settlements. This isn't necessarily an issue just in Lustria, but Lustria's terrain is such a nature that there's a lot of settlements in these kind of choke points. Now, most other campaigns, this isn't an issue. In a Khorne campaign, this is a problem because you do raise settlements as Khorne, playing as Khorne, and then you rebuild them. That's the whole play style of Khorne. Few settlements that are high tier, then slowly building up everything else, right? With Khorne corruption. But that is a problem. That genuinely affects you. So that's already a problem. That's already an issue. But on top of that, you're supposed to go out there and challenge powerful legendary lords for their skulls. but you don't have the tools. Like, Axiato deals with more legendary lords in a campaign than you do. Like, a campaign that has existed for years now is much better at the playstyle that Skulltaker should embody than the actual Skulltaker. Yes, you do have a bunch of benefits for this Cloak of Skulls, and you can make this campaign work, but you're fighting with the game to make this work. And at best, you have a travel time every 5 turns to be able to get to a target by spending a resource and only being able to do it against factions that you're at war with. Because remember, this is only being able to travel to an enemy lord, not to a neutral faction. And a lot of the stuff here, it's like, oh, more combat ability for Skulltaker. But the question is Skulltaker a one-man Doomstack? Maybe let me know. Do you think he has the potential to be a one-man Doomstack? He doesn't have some important things that would make a one-man Doomstack. I don't think he has that great ward save. Let's take a look at his actual ward save. I think it's... Where is that ward save? There's a lot of freaking effects. Okay, forget that for a moment. So we get Fear. He's only got 8% ward save. He does have a lot of physical resistance, missile resistance, and all that, but he has fairly low ward save. That is a problem in this campaign to make it work as a one-man Doomstack. He's not even the most powerful duelist in the game. Like, in a campaign situation, like, forget skirmish for a moment, consider a campaign situation. There are many legendary lords that have better skill lines, better items, better abilities of being stronger than Skulltaker in a campaign. And the only real benefit I would dare say Skulltaker has, and it takes a long time to unlock it in a campaign, is the ability he can replenish Blood Toast. But he's not even the Blood Toast insanity that other legendary lords are. Scarbrand is better than Blood Toast because he gets attrition immunity to them that's extended, and he gets extra units to them. Arbaal is better with Blood Toast because he can spawn a lot more of them inherently, well, with one of his unique mechanics. That is not something that's really applying. I mean, okay, you can, for 800 essence, which takes you dozens of turns, you can spawn a Blood Toast after defeating a lord. I'll give you a context. Do you know how fast Arbaal can do this? Turn 2. I fucking kid you not. Turn 3, 4. That is the problem. That is the inherent issue that I'm talking about here. Spending 30, 40 turns to get to the same position that the other legendary lord inherently has, or very close to inherently has, is not a great fucking campaign mechanic. You do have a better longer term situation, I suppose, than other legendary lords, so not necessarily so. So it's like Skulltaker is such a massive disappointment, really, as a legendary lord. The only reason I'm not considering him worse than Gorbad, and I did consider this, is like, one, he does have ways of making it. He does have unique mechanics that at least work, as opposed to the gimmicky bullshit that Gorbad has, that's just fluff. And you do have certain mechanics with Khorne, specifically cultists, that do allow you to traverse the world, which are also available to all other Khorne legendary lords, so he's not really special in that. It's just more so Khorne is better at making Skulltaker more unique than Gorbad. So there is that aspect. If you're wondering how I got over here to the Black Pyramid of Gash, yes, I did teleport using his unit mechanic, but that's literally just because my quest battle granted me vision, and I was able to use that to eventually get an alliance with Scarbrand and teleport over here. But that's kind of it, really, as far as unique mechanics go. I mean, you do get power, you get replenishment, etc. But again, while I wouldn't necessarily say Skulltaker is better than Scarbrand, though I think Scarbrand does have... while I wouldn't necessarily say Scarbrand is better than Skulltaker, I think Scarbrand has his own unique mechanics that do make him work quite well. And he certainly has a better starting position in fricking Lustria. Actually, yes, Scarbrand is better than Skulltaker just because he's not dealing with fricking Lustria. Like, you can ruin a legendary lord on a start position alone. Lustria sucks, and that does affect Skulltaker in a significant way. The only reason, as I said, he's not the bottom of the list, there's certain mechanics that Khorne and Skulltaker have that at least elevate him compared to Gorbad. At number 2, we have Golgfag Maneater, of the ogres. So ogres have had a fantastic rework added to their race, and Golgfag does certainly have the most interesting ogre campaign. Not necessarily because he has the most interesting mechanics overall, but because of a simple fact. Unlike Skulltaker, who has a cooldown on his teleport, with Golgfag, you can take a contract, teleport around the world, break the contract, next turn you get another contract or several other contracts dependent on where you've teleported to, and just keep getting contracts and contracts and contracts, teleport around the world, seal the world, traverse the world, in a way pretty much no one else can. I'm quite serious on this, because it is based on vision. And because it is based on vision, you do have quite a bit more flexibility in your campaign than even Axiatl has in his campaign, or even Arbaal. So that is great with regards to his campaign. That said, there are, if you will, not necessarily downsides. I wouldn't call them downsides, but more like missed opportunities, I would describe them. One, packing a camp and restoring it takes way too freaking long. So if I pack a camp right here, right? And then I want to set it up again. It's gonna take 5 freaking turns for me to do so. Maybe I can show this. Like, okay, so it's gonna take 5 turns. So that's a bit slow. But that's not really the problem. The bigger issue with regards to Golgfag, as I said, missed opportunity. So these contracts, yeah, you can start a contract, break it easily. But what are these contracts inherently giving you? Meat and money for the most part. Sometimes you get items, though not all the time. Sometimes you get faction effects, like, oh, 50 growth to all provinces. But that's pointless given the way ogres work right now, because ogres now actually have good growth in their minor settlements, which only go up to tier 3, which are easy enough to get there on their own. Construction costs, pointless, because you're saving so much money by not having to spend gold on camps, and you have few camps anyway. That's meaningless. The most useful stuff is meat, but because the way Immortal Empires works and the number of battles you'll fight in regular contract anyway, to even complete it, like consider this, the number of battles you're required to fight to complete a contract will give you a lot of meat in itself. So the meat reward at the end of a contract just feels redundant. I think they could have done a lot more, like contract chains. Like you start a contract with, say, Carl France, and you have the first contract deal with an enemy, but then you have a second contract, follow up with that, get better and better rewards, like contract tiers, etc., as opposed to just the same system every single time. That could have been a lot more interesting of a campaign, like a dynamic objective campaign. Could have made Golgfag much better than he is. Don't get me wrong, he's good, he's strong, he's very strong in a lot of ways. He doesn't have the same settlement buying bullshit that Greases can do, but in a lot of ways he is exceptionally strong, and he certainly has a lot more of a dynamic campaign than any other legendary lord. You don't have all the climates in the world available to you, to be sure, but you have a temperate wasteland mountain that covers the vast majority of the map, and jungle. So you can basically go wherever the hell you want for the most part. And even in the areas where you don't have suitable climate, you don't necessarily need a lot of settlements as ogres. Even if you were to disregard the money you're gaining from contracts, you will be raking in the cash as ogres. Money is not really too big of an issue. It mostly comes down to like how much that you can reduce upkeep. Post-battle loot has been vastly improved. My issue, if you will, with Golgfag is that it seems that there is a major disconnect between the people making these, brand new campaign ideas and the people working on Immortal Empires, the balancing, the reworks, and all that. If we were to have gotten these kind of rewards of money and meat before the ogre rework, sure, that would have been game changer, but we did get an ogre rework. So we're raking in the meat and we're raking in the cash, so it just feels redundant in that respect. Powerful lord, unique mechanics, lots of traversal around the campaign map, but certainly some things do feel redundant and not as great as I think he could have been. That's a bit of the annoying aspect. That's like, he could have been more interesting. I can see how he could have been more interesting quite easily, but they didn't do so. So yeah, good legendary lord, fun to play in a lot of ways, highly recommend the campaign. If you've never played ogres, you want to buy an ogre DLC, buy the Omens of Destruction ogres. as opposed to the Ogre Race Pack, though you can certainly buy the Ogre Race Pack and have a good enough time with that as well. And then, at number 1, we have Arbaal the Undefeated. I'll give you some idea about like a world-spanning campaign. Arbaal starts getting quests or objectives that teleport him pretty much across the known world, or vast majority of it, from turn 2, turn 3. Depends on how fast you can get to the first 5 core in favor. Once you get 5 core in favor, you get this whole tab open up with all these objectives, with all the vision, and you get to deal with enemies. And you do have stakes in this campaign. Unlike, say, Golgfag or Oxialo, who can just show up, beat someone up, with no consequence, or very little consequence if they lose. If you lose a battle as Arbaal, with his army specifically, that's the only one that can teleport, you may not lose the campaign, but you're certainly going to suffer quite a bit in your campaign if that does end up happening. And what's great about this is, like, so you may not have, again, the best climate available in the world, but Khorne does not care for climate really all that much. But what is important is you have these armies to deal with, these kind of challenges. And if the game considers that, oh, a legendary lord isn't strong enough to pose as a challenge, they will literally create rogue armies for you to deal with, which, by the way, will create new factions, like Dwarf faction that's separate from Thorgrim's one. That's an actual faction, because if they have multiple armies, even if you defeat one, they'll start being active, taking settlements, colonizing, all that, become a real issue on the campaign map. You're literally creating new enemies to fight in this campaign, but it goes beyond that. You can make fights harder to get more core in favor, and then you can have these effects active. That beyond, like, Khorne's Wrath as a combat ability, you can get more core and corruption. You can reduce the upkeep of your faction leader army, just to discount Orion mechanic, better than Orion anyway, because it's not quite the same bullshit. You can create a cult after completing a challenge, so that means that when you show up to a region, you fight the challenger, you can create a cult, and that cult can allow you even to go back there later on if you want to. You can get more campaign movement range for your faction leader. You can summon a blood host whenever you complete a challenge, or a 20% chance of summoning a blood host after a winning battle. You can have the most blood host, the most powerful Khorne economy in a campaign. Unlike Golgfag, who's just swimming in gold and just adding to that pile of shiny gold, you actually do benefit in this campaign. Maybe there's a bit too much gold in certain situations, but it depends on how aggressive you want to be in a campaign. Like over here, I'm only starting right now to recruit a single army, though I could have done that earlier. Maybe the best path is to, take some, if you want variety, is to take some risks, go for Zarnagrunda early on, get the tier 4 settlement, and start recruiting Skull Reapers, Wrathmongers, Chaos Knights, Lances, other things as well. Or demonic units. You have the easiest access out of any of the Khorne factions, or many factions in the game in general, just because you can get to Zarnagrund very quickly, and take it as a tier 4 settlement. Then you have easy access to a lot of univariety that other characters just don't, because everything that's all the way up to the highest spot, so you're missing out Slaughter Brutes, Blood Crushers, all that, and you do have to pick whether or not it's going to be a mortal settlement or a demon settlement, right? Whether or not Zarnagrund is going to be one of those, but you do have a lot of univariety from very early on in your campaign. So Skull Cannons, Artillery, Minotaurs of Khorne, you can get access to that kind of univariety. And that was one of the biggest issues I had with Khorne, the lack of univariety as opposed to just, spamming Chaos Warriors. Now you can spam Chosen, and Skull Reapers, and Wrathmongers, and Chaos Knights, and Skull Cannons, and so many other things. Even if you don't take Zarnagrund, you still can get access to that stuff much earlier than you can in either a Scarbrand campaign or a Skulltaker campaign. Just because of your starting province, the growth of that, the focus on mortal units as opposed to demonic units, because, mortal units are, more heroes, better units in terms of, battle durability, all that kind of stuff. So this campaign is just really awesome. And I don't know how, like, I think there was a mod for a campaign as Skulltaker. I don't know how that works, so maybe someone could let me know. But the people whoever designed this campaign clearly was aware of how people actually play Warhammer 3 in terms of the meta. This campaign, unlike Gorbad, unlike Skulltaker, and even Golgfag, this campaign fits so perfectly well in the meta because you get a great unit variety from the very start. You can have very interesting battles very early on in the campaign. Like from turn 2 to turn 3, you can have some of the most interesting battles of any campaign flat out. And with actual stakes in them, because again, if you lose with Arbaal, GG, well played. So there are stakes. There's a lot of power, but there's also stakes in this campaign. There is a variety of units, terrain, climate, whatever, territory that you're going for. Hell, you can even more easily confederate the other legendary lords of Khorne. So you can get Skulltaker. You won't have the Cloak of Skulls, but you can get Skulltaker. You can get Scarbrand in this campaign. And all of that just adds to a very awesome freaking campaign for Arbaal. Like, a campaign where you're actually risking something is a good thing. A campaign where you're risking something but traversing the world, seeking out strong foes to fight, and having those foes provide it for you, it's a pretty freaking great campaign. I do like it quite a bit. I'm not necessarily sold on the idea that I wish like legendary lords would get like some buffs when you're challenging them, or more units or something like that, like as opposed to just like having a rogue army spawn. Like maybe, you know, Forgrim gets a full stack of endgame units replacing whatever he has, as an example, or Axiatel, as opposed to just some rando with that. But what is here is good. And it's available to everyone. You don't need the DLC, though the DLC will enrich your experience with more units, legendary heroes, another lore choice, all that, regiments right now. So I would recommend the DLC, the Khorne DLC, but to play this campaign specifically. Costin signing out, stay tuned for more.